Hi everyone, welcome back. We're in our study on biblical doctrines of the faith, and we've been working systematically through, especially the New Testament, with our study on Jesus' future ministry, which is primarily a study of end times. And so we've worked our way through most of the New Testament to the place where now we're with John, the Apostle John's revelation of Jesus Christ, the book of Revelation. 22 chapters. It seems like it's so much, and it's so, oh my gosh, one moment it's cryptic, and the next moment it's got all these judgment series, and then one moment Jesus is speaking, the next moment an angel is speaking, the next moment John is speaking, and it's like, oh my gosh, how do we make sense of all of this? And then some take it as all allegory. It's just like an allegorical thing, so we really don't know what it means, and others take it as mostly something that's already happened. Others take it as something that is yet to happen, with some things that are history and some things that are prophecy. There's just so many different ways of looking at it. And so I want you to know that as I step in to look at teaching through John's book here, we are going to be quite systematic. And I want you to know that the way I take the book of Revelation as given to us by John as mostly a futurist book, meaning that it's mostly yet future, yet to happen. There have been some localized, it seems like prophecies that have come from Revelation that have touched certain local areas, but the challenge we have with the book of Revelation is that it is really very clearly a global picture, a global scope. And so things that happen regionally from this prophecy might be helpful in giving us a picture historically of what the final global experience might be. But it's very, very clear as we look at it, it's global in scope. And so we really haven't seen most of this book take place yet. And so what I want to do is, we can't go into the greatest depths of all of it. I mean, it would just take us hours and hours. This is a Bible school course in and of itself. And so maybe someday we'll take it on. Maybe someday I'll take us through at our church, But anyways, I want to give us kind of just an overview fashion. This is what I would call the table of contents or the menu, and an invitation, each different place, each different phase, each different segment of the book, an invitation to study this amazing prophecy, this amazing revelation that John was given. So let's begin. In this particular session, I want to give us a general overview of the book. There are basically 4 sections in the book of Revelation, and most commentators that you would read agree, whether they believe regarding the same thing regarding the timing of the coming of the Lord, they all have a general sense of agreement regarding the structure of the book. And so regardless of how you see the timing of the Lord, most commentators believe to this structure. Let's look at it. We'll read a couple of verses here and there just to kind of get us into the book. Revelation is a revelation first and foremost that God the Father gave to Jesus that he would give to his disciples. That's Revelation 1, verse 1. So right out of the gate, we understand that the Father gave Jesus permission to reveal these things to his servants, the disciples. And so John, on the Isle of Patmos, he was actually in prison. So he was put there for preaching the gospel. He was assigned to a prison island. He couldn't get off of it unless somebody took him in a boat and released him. And so he's there by the government of Rome, by the Roman culture, to put him there because he was preaching the gospel. So he had been set aside, and in this place, he's an elderly man, he's in his 90s. He receives this revelation from Jesus. Jesus opens his spirit, and John begins to see prophetically this whole record that Jesus wanted him to have. The point that we are to see from Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, is that this book is primarily about the revelation of a man. It's not just a revelation of what he will do in the future, though it does have that content, but it's mostly about what this man is like. And we see 3 common revelations of Christ in this book. We see Jesus as the beautiful bridegroom who's fighting for his wife, the church. We see Jesus as a mighty, powerful king coming to destroy the enemies of his people and to destroy the enemies of God. And then we see him as the judge who is passing judgment and can see into the hearts of men and knows those who are wicked and knows those who are righteous and bring clear righteous judgment as the judge of the whole earth. These three pictures of Jesus are clearly seen throughout the book. And so let's remember as we walk through this book, let's remember that this book is mostly a revelation of a man, his character, his nature, and what he's going to do in the future to cleanse the earth of evil. It's also a book that gives us clear events and signs to look for. It gives us understanding regarding certain events. It explains those events, and it goes back and forth, actually quite often throughout the entire book. It goes back and forth between John seeing events that are yet to come and then getting an explanation of what those events mean. And so the book goes back and forth. I like to think of it this way. It's like John is watching a movie. And in watching this movie, he gets to a couple of places where it's really intense. And he has to pause the movie and he goes, oh my gosh. And he's like on his face. And another moment, he's like so afraid. And another moment, he's like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. This is so marvelous. This is beyond my understanding. And he presses pause because he's having an emotional moment and he needs greater understanding to help him to receive more of what God wants to give. And it's often in that pause moment that an angel or a heavenly being or greater understanding is given to him and explained to him. And so we go back and forth between these chronological storyline sections and pauses that are called, I'll call them angelic explanations, where an angel or a heavenly being is giving him greater understanding. And so it goes back and forth. And I think many times it's been this back and forth between the storyline that has made it seemingly difficult to understand. But I just want us to know this does not require a PhD to understand it. It requires a relationship with Jesus, a prayer life, a life of prayer and fasting, because John was a man of prayer and fasting, and we are to receive revelation in the same way that the apostolic writers understood and knew how to receive revelation. Many of them were unschooled men. They had just spent their lifetime in prayer and fasting and study of God's Word. So let's look at four different parts of the structure of the book of Revelation in this session. Chapter 1 is John's commissioning and call to write down everything that he's seen. Jesus begins to reveal himself. We won't go into the depths of all of this, but in the first 5 chapters or so of the book of Revelation, there are over 30 different descriptions, titles, and names for Jesus. And these are all invitations for you and I in our prayer life to get to know Jesus in these particular ways. And so John in chapter 1 is commissioned. He's told by the Lord, write down what you see. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I'm the beginning and the end. He gives these different titles. He says, what you see, write it down. And then John says, verse 9, I am your brother and fellow servant in the tribulation, in the time of trouble. In other words, he can help us in our time of trouble if we read through this book. And then he tells us, even in the first couple of verses, he says, those who read this book and hold to its words, keep its words, right, and walk out their life according to this book, he said, those are the ones that are considered faithful, and they will receive a blessing from the Lord. So chapter 1 is John's calling to write down everything that he's shown. Part 2 of the book is the next 2 chapters, chapter 2 and chapter 3, which are the 7 letters to the churches of Asia Minor. And John is going to be given letters by the Lord himself. So we have Peter, who wrote epistles, John the apostle, who wrote epistles, Jude, James, Paul wrote many epistles. They all wrote letters to different churches. And Jesus did too. Here in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, Jesus gives these short letters to John that he is to deliver to the churches, but these are letters from Jesus. And he speaks to these 7 different churches to prepare them and get them ready for a very troubling time known as the Great Tribulation. And so something that we notice right away in the first 4 or 5 chapters of the book of Revelation, Jesus is doing something for his church. He's being very kind, doing something for his church that he did for his disciples that we see in John 13 to John 17. In those 5 chapters in John, Jesus is preparing his disciples, weak and broken believers, right? Some would betray him, some would deny him, right? Preparing weak and broken believers for a moment of crisis the next day, his cross, right? And so here's Jesus now preparing the churches, but not for the cross, for the great tribulation, for a very difficult time. We could probably say for the time of the cross for the church, where the church is purged and purified and is a testimony to the rest of the earth. And so Revelation chapter 1, John's commissioning to prophesy to the nations of the earth and to 7 churches. Part number 2 of Revelation is chapters 2 and 3, the messages of the letters to the churches. Part number 3, let's keep moving, Revelation 4 and 5. This is a picture of the heavenly throne room. Chapter 4 is God upon his throne, surrounded by all angels, cherubim, elders, lightning, thunder, voices, this great throne room scene of God, this picture of who God is a jasper and a sardius stone, this God that has an emerald rainbow around his throne, this God that has elders around his throne. It's this majestic, powerful throne room scene, and it is the highest throne that the whole earth would ever know and the whole universe would know. And John, in the very beginning of chapter 4, is being given an invitation to come up and see this throne room. And then in chapter 5, we're still focused on this throne. One like the Son of Man comes before this throne and receives a scroll, the title deed, the action plan. This is the Son of God, Jesus, the only one found worthy to take the scroll, to take the action plan from God's hand himself and then walk out that plan. And so right in the first 5 chapters of the book of Revelation, we have John's commissioning, chapter 1, that's part 1. Part 2 is the messages of Jesus to the churches to prepare them for a moment of difficulty. And chapter 4 and 5, part 3, is the focal point of all the earth. This is the reason why God is about to do what he's about to do. Look at this. We see the earth. There's a great difference between them. And so now God is going to focus on, now here's the plan, right? And then part 4, which is probably the largest part, of course, is chapters 6 to 22. It's the entire plan. This plan is written on the scroll that Jesus takes out of the Father's hands, and chapter 6 begins to show us how this plan works. Jesus starts to break the seals. We'll look at that. We'll start with that in the next session. But here we are, the book of Revelation and its common structure. 4 parts. Part 1, Revelation 1, John's commissioning to prophesy. Part 2, Revelation 2 and 3, the letters to the churches to prepare them for the crisis that's coming. Part 3, Revelation 4 and 5, the great throne room scene of God to focus us all on that place. This is the governing place of the earth. And part 4, Revelation 6 to 22, the actual plan that is written on the scroll that Jesus takes from the Father's hand. That's the basic structure, and most commentators agree to this structure regardless of how they see the timing of the return of the Lord. And this is the structure that I've been looking into for years and years and years, and it's been very, very helpful. The grace of the Lord be on you. In the next session, we'll start to dig into these different parts and kind of touch a little bit more in depth on each one. The Lord bless you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.